Welcome back to OS. Chloe Tilley live with you, sitting in the centre of the BBC newsroom. Now, the US President Donald Trump has called America's painkiller addiction crisis a national shame, as he declared it a public health emergency. Mr. Trump announced a plan to target the use and abuse of opioids, which kill more than 140 Americans each and every day. Well, we can now speak to two former users of opioids, one who is still in recovery. Amanda is in Virginia, Mason is in Cleveland, Ohio. Thank you both for taking time out of your day to share your experiences with us. Amanda, first of all, can you tell us how you got hooked?
Well, I started using probably in I would say 2005. OxyContin really flooded the streets. That's a painkiller, prescription painkiller. It flooded the streets of Atlanta in the early 2000s, and from there, it became a solution to my problems. I had a lot of emotional and mental and physical trauma, and spiritual as well, and it really sort of made all of that go away. And over time, I was introduced to heroin, and that's how I became acquainted with it.
How quickly did it take a hold of you? Because I've spoken to people before who've used opioids, and they've said the addiction has kicked in incredibly quickly.
I would say that, it took me years to realize that I had a problem. It really did. I was very slow to recognize that I had an issue, but I was using daily, I would say, several months into being introduced to opiates.
How about you, Mason? What's your story?
Kind of the same thing. I was a decorated high school wrestler. I was actually in a tournament, and I messed up my back. I was always a partier growing up. So when as years went on, prescriptions came back into my life. There were a lot of people around me that partied like I did, but partied harder, and I just kind of fell into the same spot as they did. Ultimately, I can relate to her story, speaking about there was just a flood of pills that hit the streets, and eventually they were getting too hard to find, and they were way too expensive, and I ended up using heroin because it was a cheaper, better resort at the time.
Did you recognize you had a problem?
I did, because I didn't realize it until a little bit later, but I did to the extent of I didn't go to college for my wrestling scholarships because I knew how I partied. So right then should have been a red flag, but I didn't accept it. And then as things got worse, I'd miss work, I'd have consequences, but none of it in the long run really mattered because I actually just took a passenger seat to the drug. I wasn't doing the drug anymore. The drug was doing me.
Oh, yeah.
You can identify with that, Amanda?
Oh, yes. Yes, exactly. And likewise, I was a musician. I am a musician. And when I was in my late teenage years, I performed all over Atlanta, and all of my friends did drugs. So I didn't see it as a problem until I started having some of these people say, why are you doing that? Does that help you somehow? It took a while for me to recognize that.
I wanted to ask you that, Amanda, how many of your friends were doing the same thing as you? Because, President Trump has called this an epidemic. And I just wonder, in both of your circles, how common this drug use was. For you, it was in your circle of friends, Amanda.
Well, no, a lot of people did. They used more like hallucinogens and that kind of thing. So opiates were what I did, and that's what I was attracted to because of the relief that I felt emotionally and physically from it. But later on, I used for the better part of a decade. So towards the end of that decade, I didn't know anyone who didn't do heroin. Every person that I knew, and all of those people are either dead or in jail now.
Wow. How about you, Macy?
Yeah, I can agree to that. For the fact that, I lost 4 people this past week that have directly been in my life. For it to say it's a general health crisis, I believe it is. But in the long run, what I think is going on with Donald Trump doing this, I absolutely think, it could be a solution. But then again, I don't think it will be.
Mason, I'm just taken aback by the fact you just said that you've lost 4 people to drugs in the last week.
And the thing is, so many people have passed this past year that I've become numb and jaded to it directly due to this epidemic. To the fact that normal people would be taken back and they'd be like, oh, that's such a tragedy. And it is, but I see it all the time. I go into rehab centers. I speak to people that are in rehabs and detoxes, and me going back there shows me it's not getting any better because these places are constantly full. I have friends that are constantly battling this, and it's one of those things where it's like, what can I do to give back and to help out any way I can personally? Because I know it's not getting better out there.
Amanda?
Yeah, I agree. I think you become very jaded to the idea of, everyone's dying. Literally, everyone is dying from this. I think it also has to do with the product that's being put out on the streets. They're putting carfentanil and fentanyl in the heroin now, and carfentanil is like an elephant tranquilizer. And you can't even respond to Narcan with that. So we've just had such an influx of people dying that there's notifications every day that I'm getting about more people that I knew from treatment who are now dead. It's crazy.
Yeah, I can agree to that. And ironically, there was a story up here about a year ago. A janitor actually took some out of a zoo, and they had it documented, and 88 people overdosed in a matter of 2 days up here in the city by me.
Wow.
Amanda, tell me, how does this start? I hear what you're saying about it gets more and more, and then people want cheaper alternatives that are on the streets. But does this come from the fact that you can get extraordinary powerful painkillers from dentists, from doctors, even over the counter in the US? Is that the problem in your mind?
No, honestly, I think that it was in the early 2000s. Now the problem has shifted, and of course then they changed the molecular structure of OxyContin so that you can't shoot it and you can't snort it anymore. So the pills have almost all but fallen off from where I sit. I would truly say that the real problem is people who have emotional, mental, physical, spiritual trauma and haven't addressed it. And we're all looking for ways to fill that hole. And opiates are incredibly effective. They're also incredibly dangerous. So people are getting prescribed stuff, but I didn't even start with me with a prescription. It started with just being introduced to a pill, and then after getting that one taste, to me, it was the solution to my emotional and mental, physical struggle that I just latched onto it and aggressively looked for it.
So if that's the case, Mason, do you think President Trump, the US government, any authority can do anything through legislation or anything that they can do to tackle this problem?
This kind of reminds me, I wasn't around for this, but I just remember it, was the Say No to Drugs campaign by Ronald Reagan back in the 1980s, where they absolutely tried to do everything they could, but the problem really didn't change. And, what it ends up coming down to, it is a decision by the individual that is out there still using whether or not they want to change their lives. And by them putting in all this work into it, I think it's great. But in the long run, I don't know what's necessarily going to happen. Yes, they made a crackdown back in the 80s, but the difference between the 80s and now is that people are dying. And I don't know what it's going to take for people to actually wake up and see, what we're dealing with is more like a catastrophe than what it actually is, for the fact that the government can do everything they can in their power. That's absolutely fine. A lot of it has to do with the individual, where the support is in certain areas, because this happens up here in Cleveland all the time, but we have probably one of the most prominent detox rehab treatment centers, like in a basically proximity in the nation. And it still happens
and that's not working. Amanda, what do you think? Do you think that President Trump or the U.S. government or any authorities can do anything to tackle this?
Absolutely. I wholeheartedly believe that there are actions that our government can take to change the amount of people who are addicts. I mean, there's such an influx of it. Obviously, something needs to change, either legislatively, the type of the pharmaceutical industry itself, the type of marketing that they use. Opiates are just one part of the problem, but my God, children are being prescribed speed every day if they have ADD, and they're also being prescribed, Valium if you've got some anxiety. All of these things are harmful to you. So I think that the problem lies in the pharmaceutical companies and the advertising that's allowed to reach doctors, and the doctors are then handing it over to clients. So I think that there are a lot of things that we can do to try to address this. I also believe that having healthcare systems that are readily available. So I live in Roanoke, Virginia. This is a very small community. We probably have 350,000 total in a valley surrounded by mountains. So getting help here was incredibly difficult for me. Not having any income because I'm a drug addict, not having the resources, insurance. I've been into state hospitals, 4 times in the emergency department just to try to get some help, and then they'll only keep you for a couple of days. So it's really difficult to find resources and help if you have no money, if you're an addict.
So even if you want that help, it's not there available. Listen, Amanda and Mason, I could speak to you for hours, and I really want to thank you for your honesty and your bravery to come on and speak to us here on OS. That's Amanda, who is in Virginia, Mason, who is in Cleveland, Ohio, 2 former users of opioids, speaking to us here on OS.